have such wonderful memories of my time at Youngstown State, and I think of it very fondly. And it's really just been such an important foundation for all of my, the rest of my life, really, up to this point, both professionally and personally. So it's so lovely to be talking with all of you today and just giving you some information from my field of developmental science about taking care of ourselves during a time that is really kind of a high stress point for a variety of reasons. So I wanted to start out with my discussion just to kind of share with you. My daughter Elisa made this visual. I told Molly at the very beginning, we're going to go old school. We're not going to use PowerPoint slides. We're going to do just paper, pencil. And so when I was thinking about what our developmental science is, the state of our knowledge is related to self-care, and trying to kind of make it down to kind of a punchy takeaway, I came up with these 4 C's that you can see here. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of them and just giving you some kind of tips to use at home during this self-isolation period to make sure you're taking good care of yourselves, and as a result, taking care of those that you care about as well. So the 4 C's we've got care, compassion, consciousness, and community. So let me just set this down then for a moment. I can bring it back up later on if we need to. And I jotted down some notes just to kind of keep myself organized here for these 10 or 15 minutes that we're going to be chatting together. And then I really want to check in with you to see if you have questions as well, or kind of follow-up information, because there's a lot of really good evidence-based work coming from my field about the role of self-care and what we know works for others and works for ourselves. So starting with the first C, looking at care, I think one of the most important things to remember about this is that we cannot really take care of others unless we're taking care of ourselves. And I think culturally, there's definitely an emphasis on, the importance of caring for others. And I think sometimes we tend to overlook or feel guilty or selfish if we're taking time to care for our physical health, to care for our emotional health. And a quote that I wanted to share with you that has really stuck with me in my own work and my own research is just that you cannot pour from an empty vessel. And that's kind of a beautiful image, I think, about the importance of making sure we're filling ourselves up with compassion and care. And I'll give you a couple of kind of concrete tips for doing that. But really, if we're not in a good state ourselves, it's going to be very difficult to offer nourishment and care to others, emotionally, physically, et cetera. So if we're thinking about providing care to ourselves, first off is that kind of mental block and making sure that we are reminding ourselves that we deserve this. We are worth giving ourselves care, giving ourselves attention, and that's going to allow us to be more compassionate to others and better able to care for others. And this comes down to some basic elements related to our physical health. When we think about nutrition and about sleep and also about movement. And so in thinking about those, I think during self-isolation, we're all thrown out of our normal routine and also thrown out of our normal opportunities to reach out and kind of find a touchstone for enjoyment. We're not able to go out to the movies. We're not able to go out to eat. We're not able to see the people necessarily that we usually see for support and encouragement. And so this really comes down to, within this care element, making sure that we're trying to set some level of routine, especially related to making sure that we're nourishing our bodies and also making sure that we're allowing our bodies a little bit of movement and also an availability to restore themselves during our sleep process. And especially when you're not having a regular schedule and you're not having to necessarily get up to go to work at a certain time, or having to go to certain appointments, a lot of those schedules can get misplaced, and that can really wreak havoc on our physical health and then as a result, our emotional and mental health. So when you're thinking about nourishment, trying to set and make sure that you're eating these square meals, making sure that you are putting energy into your body because we're all expending energy. Same with movement. I don't know about you, but if we're having to take our work and move it to working from home, And I know I'm very lucky that I have a job that allows me to work from home rather than not being able to work. But for those of us who are transitioning that way, we're not getting as much movement typically because of being at home and being inside. And so trying to create elements for movement, whether that's setting a timer on your phone to get up every 20 minutes and just stretch your back and stretch your muscles, being able to go for a walk outside, or even doing some online exercise classes. There's been a whole abundance available lately. And I know my local Y does exercise classes that they stream at different points during the day that my husband and I have been utilizing too. So just again, paying attention to those physical needs of the body is going to allow us to be more emotionally present in our own lives and for others. And then I wanted to speak about sleep just a little bit, and we'll get into compassion, consciousness, and community. And thinking about sleep, our sleep schedule can get really messed up when other routines get disrupted, and that's certainly the state that we're in right now, is a state of disruption. So with sleep, a couple important sleep hygiene tips to remind yourselves of is to put your screens away at least a half hour before you're going to try and rest and go to sleep, because screens tend to activate our brain in certain ways that make us alert rather than restful. Also making sure that you're sleeping in a dark environment. Try to make sure that it's cool as well. And a couple hours before you're going to be going to sleep, trying to go around the house and giving your brain indicators that, oh, okay, we're getting ready for sleep. So dimming the lights, for example, is a really easy technique to allow your brain and your body to start saying, okay, it's time to start resting. And then just again, that getting back to that self-care, we can feel like we need to be doing all of these things, that we don't deserve this type of rest, and to be restorative in our sleep is really important for us to be able to function and to care for ourselves and to care for others. All right, so let's go back to the 4 C's. Ta-da, my visual aid, high tech. The next one is compassion. And this is a term that's used a lot in self-care work, but also in developmental science work. And so thinking about compassion, much like care, there's really two elements to it that I wanted to speak about briefly. And I think when we think about compassion, we often focus on offering compassion to others, being kind to others, being gentle, and offering grace to others. But we also have to remind ourselves to be self-compassionate too. I think it's very easy for us to offer kind of kindness and forgiveness and to turn the other cheek for other individuals, at the same time being very, very hard on ourselves for not having it all together, for not working hard enough, for not doing enough. And so again, allowing ourselves a bit of self-compassion can be very, very powerful at this point in time. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about that allowance and putting words to it. Another part of compassion, and again, I'm just referring to my notes to make sure that I am covering everything I wanted in this brief moment, brief bit of time. Another part of compassion I wanted to speak to a little bit is something called compassion fatigue. And this gets to a little bit of a deeper root about how we offer kindness and grace to others and not so much to ourselves. And especially depending on where we find ourselves at this point in time, if we're caring for others who are ill, caring for others who need extra mental support or emotional support or physical support, compassion fatigue is a very real phenomenon where offering that compassion to others actually creates this highly stressful reaction in ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be offering care and that that's going to be a necessity for many of us, but making sure that we're cognizant that this is something we're taking on, and caring for others, it is also a weight that we carry for ourselves. And to offer ourselves compassion and kindness is really important to do, and to train our mental muscles to be forgiving to ourselves when we make a mistake, or when we feel that we haven't accomplished enough during the day, is a really important bit of mental exercise we can be doing at this point in time to make sure we're taking good care of ourselves, much like we're caring for others. Okay, back to the 4 C's. Here you go. So we've done care and compassion. The next one I want to talk about is consciousness. And this is getting to maybe some more of the self-care techniques that you may have encountered at other points in time. When I'm speaking about consciousness, I'm really talking about being present in the moment. And this is not something that certainly we expect to be happening constantly throughout your day. And really an adage for individuals who are just starting this process is to try to take 3 minutes during the day where you are present. And those 3 minutes, I think the best way to try and achieve that type of presence, that type of just being in the moment, is to focus on your breath. And again, there's a lot of good science backing this up, that focusing on your breathing, even for that brief amount of time, can have huge differences in our physiological response to stress. And 3 minutes is something that many of us or all of us can grab in the day for that brief period of time. And for some of you, you might already be practicing meditation. There's a lot of guided meditations available online that you can access for free. I also subscribe to the Calm app, which you pay for a certain subscription during the year in order to get access to all of their guided meditations. But there's also free meditations offered through the Calm app as well that I can highly recommend. But certainly, I'm sure Molly can, share my email with you. I can send you links. There are a couple of different medical schools that offer guided meditations through their websites. And that just goes to show you the science behind it, that this is endorsed from the medical community. But one thing you can do, even if you don't want to get into a meditative practice, just to focusing on your breathing for those 3 minutes, is again just to breathe in and to hold that breath for a couple of extra seconds, and then to try and exhale out a little bit longer than you did the inhale. So it's that important ratio of inhaling for a period of time, holding it a little bit longer than is natural, and then exhaling for slightly longer than the inhale. And if you do that for, again, just these 3 minutes, or even if you just find 1 minute to do it, that type of control of your breathing is really going to change, again, your stress response that you're going to see throughout your body. And for me personally, doing that type of practice, I start to see other kind of longer lasting effects on my mental status, especially related to anxiety, for the rest of the day, which is quite incredible because it's such a small time commitment for such big results. Okay. Now, finally, I wanted to talk about community. So that's my final fourth C. And here I wanted to touch on two different things. Obviously, with community, we're talking about remaining connected to others, even though we find ourselves disconnected physically because we're having to self-isolate. And luckily, if we have access to the internet, we're able to connect with a lot of people virtually. And I mentioned how when we're talking about physical movement of the body, there are exercise classes you can connect with online. I've been really not amazed, but just really so affirmed by seeing my YMCA friends who I would see every morning at the YMCA for our exercise class, seeing them virtually still has an amazing reset for me socially and emotionally when I see them in the morning, and it kind of gets my day off to this really positive start. So I encourage you to think about communities that you relied on physically, or the connections, the social connections you relied on physically, and then how perhaps you might be able to access those virtually. And there's been a lot of amendments made by important community programs and academic programs that allow for this type of connection. And just the fact that you're here kind of connecting with the Honors College and the Honors Group through these Firesides chat is another way to really establish that important social connection. Humans are social creatures. We evolve to be social individuals. And so social isolation can be particularly difficult for us. And finding these little points of connection is so valuable and worth our time. Another element of community that I wanted to just, again, be conscious of is looking at our consumption of media, because social media is certainly a wonderful avenue to connect to others. I have a bunch of kind of or my academics or what have you. But we also have to be very conscious that at this point in time, maybe more so than any other, our consumption, our media diet, if you will, rather than just focusing on the nutrition we offer our body, but also the consumption of media that's affecting our mind and our emotional state, can be potentially fairly toxic. And it can also be something that we are really inundating ourselves with without realizing it. And so part of community as well is knowing when to shut off the consumption of media and making sure that we're not checking numbers of COVID-19 cases, constantly throughout the day, to a point where it's becoming a bit compulsive and really anxiety provoking. So being mindful to restrict our consumption of media to points where we're staying informed, but we're also supporting our mental and our physical health, rather than letting it kind of take over and overwhelm our life. Because there's definitely a potential for, through these virtual connections, for us to feel like we're constantly being barraged, or we're constantly having to check our phone and check this information and getting news updates. And we have to be, I think, mindful of how we're managing that and maintaining a healthy media diet, and also maintaining a healthy community connection. So those are my 4 C's that I wanted to share with you, our developmental science take home, if you will. And I'm looking at the time, I think we're right on time. So maybe I can turn it over to see if there are any questions to check in with all of you about, related to what I shared, or just how you're doing at this point in time.